Hello my precious everyone, welcome back to Wow Mel. In these coming months, I'm hopefully going to be finally querying my novel to publishers. So I won't be starting a new novel until probably around November. While I have this time, I thought I would share my outlining process on how I set up my novels in the first place. I feel like every author has their own outlining process. Some authors don't outline at all, some have like really basic bullet points, some are super in-depth and complicated, some are just a collection of notes, and some people change it up with each book. No matter what method you use, personally, I do recommend outlining. I have tried writing novels without a novel prepared beforehand and with just the most basic concept of the plot in my head. And though I completed my first novel that way, and it technically made sense, there were many useless scenes and things got quite messy at times. After that experience, I knew I needed a change and I began outlining my novels beforehand. I personally like it because it helps eliminate writer's block for me, because I always know what comes next. It lets me plan interwoven symbols and plot points and plot twists beforehand, so I'm not just adding things in willy-nilly and hoping it all works out. The downside is that it's not as easy to come up with new ideas mid-writing and put them in because you already have the structure of how your book looks. But honestly, some outlines can be very flexible, so that's not even a problem. And in the editing stage, you'll likely have to add and take away things anyways, so I wouldn't really let this deter you too much. I am going to show you my personal outlining method that I use for my novels. I'll likely make a video about other actual outlining structures and methods in the future, ones that I don't necessarily use but might be of use to you to reference, but for today I'll just show you what works for me. Firstly, of course, I come up with my basic story idea before I begin outlining. If you haven't seen my video on how I come up with story ideas, make sure you click the link that's in one of these corners and check that out as well. But assuming you have an idea, let me introduce you to my method. I sort of use two different methods, but firstly I'll begin with my more prevalent one. I created the 700 Club and Gap Year this way. I am a person who thinks incredibly linearly. While I might know the ending of a book, I don't write out any of those scenes until I know my beginning and my middle, and then I finally reach the end. It stresses me out to have a bunch of scenes out of order, so even if I come up with something, I hold it off until later or put it in the order as quickly as possible. I also write all my outlines out physically on paper in this journal. I don't know why, it just seems to help me. Here's a basis for what my outline looks like. I'll have a little cover page that says the story title or the placeholder story title, and another section for ideas that I want to include somewhere but I'm not quite sure where to put it yet. This is what I do with ideas that I have for like the ending or middle that I don't want to write down in my outline because I didn't reach that section yet. I also have a sort of outline for the outline, just the very most basic plot points, the major beats for the story I'll write down so I can stay on track while I'm creating the larger outlines. For some people, that really basic one is actually all they need to write the story completely fine, but I do things actually pretty in depth, I like to think. I honestly outline on like a scene by scene basis because that's just what works for me. I'll also dedicate a page for each of the main characters. I'll write basic information like their names, their birthdays, a physical description of them, and just the very basis of their personality. Sometimes I'll even write a page dedicated to like a prevalent setting. Like in Gap Year, the main character has an apartment, so I have a page about like how expensive it is and how big it is and how many rooms it is and things that I can refer back to. And then I move on to the actual outline. I wish I could say I had some magic method for how I come up with my scenes, but honestly it just requires a lot of thinking. One book I outlined in just 1 week, another one took me almost an entire month. For Gap Year and the 700 Club, I literally wrote down scene by scene what I thought of in order and how the book would play out. If I had to move things around, I would literally draw arrows on my outline, which made it a little bit messy, but I could at least understand it, so it worked for me. I also bounced a lot of ideas off of my older sister, even just in the creation process of the book, and I would highly recommend this. Getting another opinion right off the bat can help make sure your novel doesn't have a shaky basis to begin with, especially if you're doing like a realistic sort of novel. You want to bounce your plot points off of someone to make sure what's happening is realistic by another person's standards. So that's basically that. I just go by scene, but for my other novel, Freak Show, I have a different sort of process. Freak Show bounces between perspectives, so that was a bit trickier for me. I had my usual pages of character information, setting, and story background, but when it came to the actual scenes, I had to group events into preset chapters, so that when I bounced from one perspective to the other, the pacing of one person's story wasn't way different than another person's. That wound up being really hard because actually writing out the scenes, some chapters turned out way longer or way shorter than I anticipated. And it became kind of chaotic, which is gonna be a major problem for me when I'm editing it. Another problem that the book presented was I actually struggled with coming up with the scenes in general. To remedy this, I use what I call the movie method. I did not come up with this myself, and maybe it has an official name, I don't know, but that's just what I call it, and it worked out pretty great for me. What you do is you make a playlist for your novel. Include songs that remind you of the characters, the plot, the overall vibe, or just something that you picture if your book were to be a movie, the songs that would play in the trailer, or the credits, or the opening scenes, or whatever. Then when your playlist is set up, you lay down and you close your eyes and you literally daydream about your novel. See the scenes in your head playing out like scenes in a movie. It doesn't necessarily have to be in order, just see the scenes in your head as they fit with the pieces of music, and you can even play it multiple times if you need to. Once you finally think you're ready, you can open your eyes, get some note cards, and write down the scenes as you remember them. Then you can actually take the scenes that are on the note cards, move them around into an order that makes more sense, or into areas where they'll fill in the gaps of your story that you're not quite sure what happens. And once they're in the proper order, then you can actually go and write them down in your outline. If you don't think you have enough scenes, just repeat the process. And you can always take out the fluff and unneeded scenes later. It's better to write down more scenes than you end up using than not have enough scenes to create the book to begin with. That method is actually what I use to create the bulk of the scenes in Freak Show. I also added a few more features to that outline as well. As it's partially a survival book, I actually kept a list for each character of the supplies and food they had on hand. Whenever they used any of them in the novel, I would cross it out on the list to make sure their supplies and food were consistent. You can add extra pages for little things like these however you deem necessary, because what I refer to as my outline isn't even necessarily just the outline of the scenes themselves, but it's honestly just what I call my hub of reference material for my book. Maybe that is what an outline is, I don't really know. But yes, that is what I do. In short, I add pages for the basics of the character, the basics of any important settings, and of course the basic like begin, middle, and like the most important events in the book. So you have that basic framework to bounce off of. You can add any other necessary information like the survival logs that I had, and then I go into the actual outline part of it where I just sit down and think for a really long time about logically, this is how it opens. Then they do this. Then they do this, and if I get stuck, I refer back to my very like basic plot structure outline to see where they're going next and how I can sort of get them there. And so I just take it scene by scene by scene. Some people don't need to go that specific. For me, I kind of do, and it's worked for me. You'll find what works out for you. I don't use pre-made structures. I feel kind of pigeonholed when I use them. I feel like it just kind of stifles my creativity, but for some people, pre-made outline structures can really help you keep the pacing and the beats and make sure it all goes smoothly. So I will likely make videos about other outlining structures in the future that are a little more structured. than mine. I just write things scene by scene and then clean things up and add things when the first draft is done. I hope that was helpful. I'm honestly not sure if it actually was. Everyone has a different process, so don't worry. I know me saying sit down and write things out in order is probably the most useless advice for some people, but that's what I do, and I honestly hope it helps. I'm not going to show you like close up what my outline looks like because these books aren't published yet, and don't steal my ideas. As a very basis for what my outlines look like, this is just in order what happens, and it just goes on. That's a whole novel right there. This is what I do, but if you guys have any tips or anything, just let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me, my precious everyone. Have a beautiful day and good luck outlining your books. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!